Wednesday, March 1st, 1944. Dear Kitty, my own affairs have been pushed into the background by a burglary. I'm becoming boring with all my burglars, but what can I do? They seem to take such a delight in honoring Colin and company with their visits. This burglary is much more complicated than the one in July 1943. When Mr. Van Don went to Crowler's office at 7:30, as usual, he saw that the communicating glass doors and the office door were open. Surprised at this, he walked through and was even more amazed to see that the doors of the little dark room were open too, and that there was a terrible mess in the main office. There has been a burglar, he thought to himself at once, and to satisfy himself he went straight downstairs to look at the front door, felt the Yale lock, and found everything closed. Oh, then both Peter and Ellie must have been very slack this evening, he decided. He remained in Crowler's room a while, then switched off the lamp and went upstairs, without worrying much about either the open doors or the untidy office. This morning Peter knocked at our door early and came with the not-so-pleasant news that the front door was wide open. He also told us that the projector and Crowler's new portfolio had both disappeared from the cupboard. Peter was told to close the door. Van Don told us of his discoveries the previous evening, and we were all awfully worried. What must have happened is that the thief had a skeleton key, because the lock was quite undamaged. He must have crept into the house quite early and closed the door behind him, hidden himself when disturbed by Mr. Van Don, and when he departed fled with his spoils, leaving the door open in his haste. Who can have our key? Why didn't the thief go to the warehouse? Might it be one of our own warehousemen, and would he perhaps betray us, since he certainly heard Van Don and perhaps even saw him? It is all very creepy, because we don't know whether this same burglar may not take it into his head to visit us again. Or perhaps it gave him a shock to find that there was someone walking about in the house. Yours, Anne. Thursday, March 2nd, 1944. Dear Kitty, Margot and I were both up in the attic today. Although we were not able to enjoy it together as I had imagined, still I do know that she wires my feelings over most things. During dishwashing, Ellie began telling Mummy and Mrs. Van Don that she felt very discouraged at times. And what help do you think they gave her? Do you know what Mummy's advice was? She should try to think of all the other people who are in trouble. What is the good of thinking of misery when one is already miserable oneself? I said this too and was told, you keep out of this sort of conversation. Aren't the grown-ups idiotic and stupid? Just as if Peter, Margot, Ellie, and I don't all feel the same about things, and only a mother's love or that of a very, very good friend can help us. These mothers here just don't understand us at all. Perhaps Mrs. Van Don does a little more than Mummy. Oh, I would have so liked to say something to poor Ellie, something that I know from experience would have helped her. But Daddy came between us and pushed me aside. Aren't they all stupid? We aren't allowed to have any opinions. People can tell you to keep your mouth shut, but it doesn't stop you having your own opinion. Even if people are still very young, they shouldn't be prevented from saying what they think. Only great love and devotion can help Ellie, Margot, Peter, and me, and none of us gets it. And no one, especially the stupid know-alls here, can understand us, because we are much more sensitive and much more advanced in our thoughts than anyone here would ever imagine in their wildest dreams. Mummy is grumbling again at the moment. She is obviously jealous, because I talk more to Mrs. Van Don than to her nowadays. I managed to get hold of Peter this afternoon, and we talked for at least 3/4 of an hour. Peter had the greatest difficulty in saying anything about himself. It took a long time to draw him out. He told me how often his parents quarrel over politics, cigarettes, and all kinds of things. He was very shy. Then I talked to him about my parents. He defended Daddy. He thought him a first-rate chap. Then we talked about upstairs and downstairs again. He was really rather amazed that we don't always like his parents. Peter, I said, you know I'm always honest, so why shouldn't I tell you that we can see their faults too? And among other things I also said, I would so like to help you, Peter, can't I? You're in such an awkward position, and although you don't say anything, it doesn't mean that you don't care. Oh, I would always welcome your help. Perhaps you would do better to go to Daddy. He wouldn't let anything go any further. Take it from me. You can easily tell him. Yes, he is a real pal. You're very fond of him, aren't you? Peter nodded and I went on, and he is of you too. He looked up quickly and blushed. It was really moving to see how these few words pleased him. Do you think so? He asked. Yes, I said. You can easily tell by little things that slip out now and then. Peter is a first-rate chap, too, just like Daddy. Yours, Anne. Friday, March 3rd, 1944. Dear Kitty, when I looked into the candle this evening, in Jewish homes candles are lit on the Sabbath eve, I felt calm and happy. Oma seems to be in the candle, and it is Oma too who shelters and protects me and who always makes me feel happy again. But there is someone else who governs all my moods, and that is Peter. When I went up to get potatoes today and was still standing on the stepladder with the pan, he once asked, "What have you been doing since lunch?" I went and sat on the steps and we started talking. At 5:15, an hour later, the potatoes, which had been sitting on the floor in the meantime, finally reached their destinations. Peter didn't say another word about his parents. We just talked about books and about the past. The boy has such warmth in his eyes. I believe I'm pretty near to being in love with him. He talked about that this evening. I went into his room after peeling the potatoes and said that I felt so hot. You can tell what the temperature is by Margot and me. If it's cold, we are white, and if it is hot, we are red in the face, I said. In love? He asked. Why should I be in love? My answer was rather silly. Why not? He said, and then we had to go for supper. Would he have meant anything by that question? I finally managed to ask him today whether he didn't find my chatter a nuisance. He only said, "It's okay, I like it." To what extent this answer was just shyness, I am not able to judge. Kitty, I'm just like someone in love, who can only talk about her darling. And Peter really is a darling. When shall I be able to tell him so? Naturally, only if he thinks I'm a darling too. But I'm quite capable of looking after myself, and he knows that very well. And he likes his tranquility, so I have no idea how much he likes me. In any case, we are getting to know each other a bit. I wish we dared to tell each other much more already. Who knows, the time may come sooner than I think. I get an understanding look from him about twice a day, I wink back, and we both feel happy. I certainly seem quite mad to be talking about him being happy, and yet I feel pretty sure that he thinks just the same as I do. Yours, Anne. Saturday, March 4th, 1944. Dear Kitty, this is the first Saturday for months and months that hasn't been boring, dreary, and dull. And Peter is the cause. This morning I went to the attic to hang up my apron when Daddy asked whether I'd like to stay and talk some French. I agreed. First, we talked French, and I explained something to Peter, then we did some English. Daddy read out loud to us from Dickens, and I was in the seventh heaven because I sat on Daddy's chair very close to Peter. I went downstairs at 11 o'clock. When I came upstairs again at 11:30, he was already waiting for me on the stairs. We talked until 1:45. If, as I leave the room, he gets a chance after a meal, for instance, and if no one can hear, he says, "Goodbye," and "See you soon." Oh, I am so pleased. I wonder if he is going to fall in love with me after all? Anyway, he is a very nice fellow, and no one knows what lovely talks I have with him. Mrs. Van Dawn quite approves when I go and talk to him, but she asked today teasingly, "Can I really trust you two up there together?" Of course, I protested. Really, you quite insult me. From morn till night, I look forward to seeing Peter. Yours, Anne. Monday, March 6th, 1944. Dear Kitty, I can tell by Peter's face that he thinks just as much as I do, and when Mrs. Van Dawn yesterday evening said scoffingly, "The thinker," I was irritated. Peter flushed and looked very embarrassed, and I was about to explode. Why can't these people keep their mouths shut? You can't imagine how horrible it is to stand by and see how lonely he is and yet not be able to do anything. I can so well imagine, just as if I were in his place, how desperate he must feel sometimes in quarrels and in love. Poor Peter, he needs love very much. When he said he didn't need any friends, how harsh the words sounded to my ears. Oh, how mistaken he is. I don't believe he meant it a bit. He clings to his solitude, to his affected indifference and his grown-up ways, but it's just an act, so as never to show his real feelings. Poor Peter, How long will he be able to go on playing this role? Surely a terrible outburst must follow as the result of this superhuman effort? Oh, Peter, if only I could help you. If only you would let me. Together we could drive away your loneliness and mine. I think a lot, but I don't say much. I am happy if I see him and if the sun shines when I'm with him. I was very excited yesterday. While I was washing my hair, I knew that he was sitting in the room next to ours. I couldn't do anything about it. The more quiet and serious I feel inside, the more noisy I become outwardly. Who will be the first to discover and break through this armor? I'm glad after all that the Van Dons have a son and not a daughter. My conquest could never have been so difficult, so beautiful, so good, if I had not happened to hit on someone of the opposite sex. Yours, Anne. P.S. You know that I'm always honest with you, so I must tell you that I actually live from one meeting to the next. I keep hoping to discover that he too is waiting for me all the time, and I'm thrilled if I notice a small shy advance from his side. I believe he'd like to say a lot just like I would. Little does he know that it's just his clumsiness that attracts me. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, March 7th, 1944. Dear Kitty, if I think now of my life in 1942, it all seems so unreal. It was quite a different and who enjoyed that heavenly existence from the and who has grown wise within these walls. Yes, it was a heavenly life. Boyfriends at every turn, about 20 friends and acquaintances of my own age, the darling of nearly all the teachers, spoiled from top to toe by mummy and daddy, lots of sweets, enough pocket money, what more could one want? You will certainly wonder by what means I got around all these people. Peter's word, attractiveness, is not altogether true. All the teachers were entertained by my cute answers, my amusing remarks, my smiling face, and my questioning looks. That is all. I was a terrible flirt, coquettish and amusing. I had one or two advantages, which kept me rather in favor. I was industrious, honest, and frank. I would never have dreamed of cribbing from anyone else. I shared my sweets generously, and I wasn't conceited. Wouldn't I have become rather forward with so much admiration? It was a good thing that in the midst of, at the height of, all this gaiety, I suddenly had to face reality, and it took me at least a year to get used to the fact that there was no more admiration forthcoming. How did I appear at school? The one who thought of new jokes and pranks, always king of the castle, never in a bad mood, never a crybaby. No wonder everyone liked to cycle with me, and I got their attentions. Now I look back at that, and as an amusing, but very superficial girl who has nothing to do with the and of today. Peter said quite rightly about me, if ever I saw you, you were always surrounded by 2 or more boys and a whole troop of girls. You were always laughing and always the center of everything. What is left of this girl? Oh, don't worry, I haven't forgotten how to laugh or to answer back readily. I'm just as good, if not better, at criticizing people, and I can still flirt if I wish. That's not it though, and like that sort of life again for an evening, a few days, or even a week, the life which seems so carefree and gay. But at the end of that week, I would be dead beat and would be only too thankful to listen to anyone Atria began to talk about something sensible. I don't want followers, but friends, admirers who fall not for a flattering smile, but for what one does and for one's character. I know quite well that the circle around me would be much smaller. But what does that matter, as long as one still keeps a few sincere friends? Yet I wasn't entirely happy in 1942 in spite of everything. I often felt deserted, but because I was on the go the whole day long, I didn't think about it and enjoyed myself as much as I could. Consciously or unconsciously, I tried to drive away the emptiness I felt with jokes and pranks. Now I think seriously about life and what I have to do. One period of my life is over forever. The carefree school days are gone never to return. I don't even long for them anymore. I have outgrown them. I can't just only enjoy myself as my serious side is always there. I look upon my life up till the new year, as it were, through a powerful magnifying glass. The sunny life at home, then coming here in 1942, the sudden change, the quarrels, the bickerings. I couldn't understand it. I was taken by surprise, and the only way I could keep up some bearing was by being impertinent. The first half of 1943, My fits of crying, the loneliness, how I slowly began to see all my faults and shortcomings, which are so great and which seemed much greater then. During the day, I deliberately talked about anything and everything that was farthest from my thoughts, tried to drop him to me, but couldn't. Alone, I had to face the difficult task of changing myself to stop the everlasting reproaches, which were so oppressive and which reduced me to such terrible despondency. Things improved slightly in the second half of the year. I became a young woman and was treated more like a grown-up. I started to think and write stories and came to the conclusion that the others no longer had the right to throw me about like an India rubber ball. I wanted to change in accordance with my own desires. But one thing that struck me even more was when I realized that even Daddy would never become my confidant over everything. I didn't want to trust anyone but myself anymore. At the beginning of the new year, the second great change, my dream. And with it I discovered my longing, not for a girlfriend, but for a boyfriend. I also discovered my inward happiness and my defensive armor of superficiality and gaiety. In due time I quieted down and discovered my boundless desire for all that is beautiful and good. And in the evening, when I lie in bed and end my prayers with the words, I thank you, God, for all that is good and dear and beautiful, I am filled with joy. Then I think about the good of going into hiding, of my health and with my whole being of the dearness of Peter, of that which is still embryonic and impressionable and which we neither of us dare to name or touch, of that which will come sometime, love, the future, happiness, and of the beauty which exists in the world, nature, beauty, and all that is exquisite and fine. I don't think then of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains. This is one of the things that Mummy and I are so entirely different about. Her counsel when one feels melancholy is, think of all the misery in the world and be thankful that you are not sharing in it. My advice is, go outside, to the fields, enjoy nature and the sunshine, go out and try to recapture happiness in yourself and in God. Think of all the beauty that's still left in and around you and be happy. I don't see how Mummy's idea can be right, because then how are you supposed to behave if you go through the misery yourself? Then you are lost. On the contrary, I've found that there is always some beauty left in nature, sunshine, freedom in yourself. These can all help you. Look at these things, then you find yourself again, and God, and then you regain your balance. And whoever is happy will make others happy too. He who has courage and faith will never perish in misery. Yours, Anne. Sunday, March 12th, 1944. Dear Kitty, I can't seem to sit still lately. I run upstairs and down and then back again. I love talking to Peter, but I'm always afraid of being a nuisance. He has told me a bit about the past, about his parents, and about himself. It's not half enough though, and I ask myself why it is that I always long for more. He used to think I was unbearable, and I return the compliment. Now I have changed my opinion. Has he changed his too? I think so. Still, it doesn't necessarily mean that we shall become great friends, although as far as I am concerned it would make the time here much more bearable. But still, I won't get myself upset about it. I see quite a lot of him, and there's no need to make you unhappy about it too, Kitty, just because I feel so miserable. On Saturday afternoon, I felt in such a whirl, after hearing a whole lot of sad news, that I went and lay on my divan for a sleep. I only wanted to sleep to stop myself thinking. I slept till 4 o'clock, then I had to go into the living room. I found it difficult to answer all Mummy's questions and think of some little excuse to tell Daddy, as an explanation for my long sleep. I resorted to a headache, which wasn't a lie, as I had one, but inside. Ordinary people, ordinary girls, teenagers like myself, will think I'm a bit cracked with all my self-pity. Yes, that's what it is, but I pour out my heart to you. Then for the rest of the day I'm as impudent, gay, and self-confident as I can be, in order to avoid questions and get on my own nerves. Margot is very sweet and would like me to trust her, but still, I can't tell her everything. She's a darling, she's good and pretty, but she lacks the nonchalance for conducting deep discussions. She takes me so seriously, much too seriously, and then thinks about her queer little sister for a long time afterwards, looks searchingly at me. at every word I say and keeps on thinking, is this just a joke or does she really mean it? I think that's because we are together the whole day long, and that if I trusted someone completely, then I shouldn't want them hanging around me all the time. When shall I finally untangle my thoughts? When shall I find peace and rest within myself again? Yours, Anne. Tuesday, March 14th, 1944. Dear Kitty, perhaps it would be entertaining for you, though not in the least, for me to hear what we are going to eat today. As the charwoman is at work downstairs, I'm sitting on the Van Don's table at the moment. I have a handkerchief soaked in some good scent, bought before we came here, over my mouth and held against my nose. You won't gather much from this, so let's begin at the beginning. The people from whom we obtained food coupons have been caught, so we just have our 5 ration cards and no extra coupons and no fats. As both Meep and Kufuus are ill, Ellie hasn't time to do any shopping, so the atmosphere is dreary and dejected, and so is the food. From tomorrow we shall not have a scrap of fat, butter, or margarine left. We can't have fried potatoes to save bread for breakfast any longer, so we have porridge instead, and as Mrs. Van Don thinks we're starving, we have bought some full cream milk under the counter. Our supper today consists of a hash made from kale, which has been preserved in a barrel. Hence the precautionary measure with the handkerchief. It's incredible how kale can stink when it's a year old. The smell in the room is a mixture of bad plums, strong preservatives, and rotten eggs. Ugh. The mere thought of eating that muck makes me feel sick. Added to this, our potatoes are suffering from such peculiar diseases that out of 2 buckets of pommes de terre, 1 whole one ends up on the stove. We amuse ourselves by searching for all the different kinds of diseases and have come to the conclusion that they range from cancer and smallpox to measles. Oh, no, it's no joke to be in hiding during the 4th year of the war. If only the whole rotten business was over. Quite honestly, I wouldn't care so much about the food, if only it were more pleasant here in other ways. There's the rub. This tedious existence is beginning to make us all touchy. The following are the views of the 5 grown-ups on the present situation. Mrs. Van Don, the job as queen of the kitchen lost its attraction a long time ago. It's dull to sit and do nothing, so I go back to my cooking again. Still, I have to complain that it's impossible to cook without any fats, and all these nasty smells make me sick. Nothing but ingratitude and rude remarks do I get in return for my services. I am always the black sheep, always the guilty one. Moreover, according to me, very little progress is being made in the war. In the end, the Germans will still win. I'm afraid we're going to starve, and if I'm in a bad mood, I scold everyone. Mr. Van Don, I must smoke and smoke and smoke, and then the food, the political situation, and Curly's moods don't seem so bad. Curly is a darling wife. But if he hasn't anything to smoke, then nothing is right, and this is what one hears. I'm getting ill. We don't live well enough. I must have meat. Frightfully stupid person, my Curly. After this a terrific quarrel is sure to follow. Mrs. Frank, food is not very important, but I would love a slice of rye bread now. I feel so terribly hungry. If I were Mrs. Van Don, I would have put a stop to Mr. Van Don's everlasting smoking a long time ago. But now I must definitely have a cigarette, because my nerves are getting the better of me. The English make a lot of mistakes, but still the war is progressing. I must have a chat and be thankful I'm not in Poland. Mr. Frank, everything's all right. I don't require anything. Take it easy, we've ample time. Give me my potatoes and then I will keep my mouth shut. Put some of my rations on one side for Ellie. The political situation is very promising. I'm extremely optimistic. Mr. Dussel, I must get my task for today. Everything must be finished on time. Political situation outstanding, and it is impossible that will be caught. I. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, March 15th, 1944. Dear Kitty. Phew. Oh dear, released from the somber scenes for a Went today, I hear nothing but if this or that should happen, then we are going to be in difficulties. If he or she should become ill, then completely isolated, and then if. Enfin, I expect you know the rest. At least I presume you know the secret annexers well enough by this time to be able to guess the trend of their conversations. The reason for all this if that Mr. Crowler has been called up to go digging. Ellie has a streaming cold and will probably have to stay at home tomorrow. Meep hasn't fully recovered from her flu yet, and Kufuus has had such bad hemorrhage of the stomach that he lost consciousness. What a tale of woe. The warehouse people are getting a free day tomorrow. Ellie can stay at home, then the door will remain locked and we shall have to be quiet as mice, so that the neighbors don't hear us. Hank is coming to visit the deserted ones at 1 o'clock, playing the role of zookeeper, as it were. For the first time in ages, he told us something about the great wide world this afternoon. You should have seen the 8 of us sitting around him. It looked exactly like a picture of grandmother telling a story. He talked 19 to the dozen to his grateful audience about food, of course, and then Meep's doctor, and everything that we asked about. Doctor, he said, don't talk to me about the doctor. I rang him up this morning, had his assistant on the phone, and asked for a prescription for flu. The reply was that I could come and get the prescription any time between 8 and 9 in the morning. If you have a very bad attack of flu, the doctor comes to the telephone himself and says, put out your tongue, say ah. I can hear all right that your throat is inflamed. I'll write out a prescription for you to order from the chemist. Goodbye. And that's that. A fine practice that, run by telephone only. But I don't want to criticize the doctors. After all, a person has but 2 hands, and in these days there's an abundance of patients and very few doctors to cope with them. Still, we couldn't help laughing when Hank repeated the telephone conversation to us. I can just imagine what a doctor's waiting room must look like nowadays. One doesn't look down on panel patients anymore, but on the people with minor ailments and thinks, hi, you, what are you doing here? End of the line. Please. Urgent cases have priority. Yours, Anne. Thursday, March 16th, 1944. Dear Kitty. The weather is lovely, superb. I can't describe it. I'm going up to the attic in a minute. Now I know why I'm so much more restless than Peter. He has his own room where he can work, dream, think, and sleep. I am shoved about from one corner to another. I hardly spend any time in my double room, and yet it's something I long for so much. That is the reason, too, why I so frequently escape to the attic. There, and with you, I can be myself for a while, just a little while. Still, I don't want to me about myself. On the contrary, I want to moan be brave. Thank goodness the others can't tell what my inward feelings are, except that I'm growing cooler towards Mummy daily. I'm not so affectionate to Daddy and don't tell Margot a single thing. I'm completely closed up. Above all, I must maintain my outward reserve. No one must know that war still reigns incessantly within. War between desire and common sense. The latter has won up till now, yet will the former prove to be the stronger of the two? Sometimes I fear that it will, and sometimes I long for it to be. Oh, it is so terribly difficult never to say anything to Peter, but I know that the first to begin must be he. There's so much I want to say and do. I've lived it all in my dreams. It is so hard to find that yet another day has gone by, and none of it comes true. Yes, Kitty and is a crazy child, but I do live in crazy times and under still crazier circumstances. But, still, the brightest spot of all is that at least I can write down my thoughts and feelings. Otherwise, I would be absolutely stifled. I wonder what Peter thinks about all these things. I keep hoping that I can talk about it to him one day. There must be something he has guessed about me, because he certainly can't love the outer, and which is the one he knows so far. How can he, who loves peace and quiet, have any liking for all my bustle and din? Can he possibly be the first and only one to have looked through my concrete armor? And will it take him long to get there? Isn't there an old saying that love often springs from pity, or that the two go hand in hand? Is that the case with me too? Because I'm often just as sorry for him as I am for myself. I really don't honestly know how to begin, and however would he be able to, when he finds talking so much more difficult than I do? If only could write to him, then at least I would know that he would grasp what I want to say, because it's so terribly difficult to put it into words. Yours, Anne. Friday, March 17th, 1944. Dear Kitty. A sigh of relief has gone through the secret Annex. Crowler has been exempted from digging by the court. Ellie has given her nose a talking to and strictly forbidden it to be a nuisance to her today. So, everything is all right again, except that Margot and I are getting a bit tired of our parents. Don't misunderstand me. I can't get on well with Mummy at the moment, as you know. I still love Daddy just as much, and Margot loves Daddy and Mummy, but when you are as old as we are, you do want to decide just a few things for yourself. You want to be independent sometimes. If I go upstairs, then I'm asked what I'm going to do. I'm not allowed salt with my food. Every evening regularly at 8:15, Mummy asks whether I ought not to start undressing. Every book I read must be inspected. I must admit that they are not at all strict, and I'm allowed to read nearly everything, and yet we are both sick of all the remarks plus all the questioning that go on the whole day long. Something else, especially about me, that doesn't please them. I don't feel like giving lots of kisses anymore, and I think fancy nicknames are terribly affected. In short, I'd really like to be rid of them for a while. Margot said last evening, I think it's awfully annoying, the way they ask if you've got a headache or whether you don't feel well, if you happen to give a sigh and put your hand to your head. It is a great blow to us both, suddenly to realize how little remains of the confidence and harmony that we used to have at home. And it's largely due to the fact that we're all skew with here. By this I mean that we are treated as children over outward things, and we are much older than most girls of our age inwardly. Although I'm only 14, I know quite well what I want. I know who is right and who is wrong. I have my opinions, my own ideas and principles, and although it may sound pretty mad from an adolescent, I feel more of a person than a child. I feel quite independent of anyone. I know that I can discuss things and argue better than Mummy. I know I'm not so prejudiced. I don't exaggerate so much. I am more precise and adroit, and because of this you may laugh, I feel superior to her over a great many things. If I love anyone, above all I must have admiration for them, admiration and respect. Everything would be all right if only I had Peter, for I do admire him in many ways. He is such a nice, good-looking boy. Yours, Anne. Sunday, March 19th, 1944. Dear Kitty, yesterday was a great day for me. I had decided to talk things out with Peter. Just as we were going to sit down to supper, I whispered to him, "Are you going to do shorthand this evening, Peter?" "No," was his reply. "Then I'd just like to talk to you later." He agreed. After the dishes were done, I stood by the window in his parents' room a while for the look of things, but it wasn't long before I went to Peter. He was standing on the left side of the open window. I went and stood on the right side, and we talked. It was much easier to talk beside the open window in semi-darkness than in bright light, and I believe Peter felt the same. We told each other so much, so very, very much, that I can't repeat it all, but it was lovely, the most wonderful evening I have ever had in the secret Annex. I will just tell you briefly the various things we talked about. First, we talked about the quarrels and how I regard them differently now, and then about the estrangement between us and our parents. I told Peter about Mummy and Daddy and Margot and about myself. At one moment he asked, "I suppose you always give each other a good night kiss, don't you?" "One, dozens, why, don't you?" "No. I have hardly ever kissed anyone." "Not even on your birthday?" "Yes, I have then." We talked about how we neither of us confide in our parents, and how his parents would have loved to have his confidence, but that he didn't wish it. How I cry my heart out in bed, and he goes up into the loft and swears. How Margot and I really only know each other well for a little while, but that, even so, we don't tell each other everything, because we are always together. Over every imaginable thingo. He was just as I thought. Then we talked about 1942, how different we were then. We just don't recognize ourselves as the same people anymore. How we simply couldn't bear each other in the beginning. He thought I was much too talkative and unruly, and I soon came to the conclusion that I'd no time for him. I couldn't understand why he didn't flirt with me, but now I'm glad. He also mentioned how much he isolated himself from us all. I said that there was not much difference between my noise and his silence. That I love peace and quiet too, and have nothing for myself alone, except my diary. How glad he is that my parents have children here, and that I'm glad he is here. That I understand his reserve now and his relationship with his parents, and how I would love to be able to help him. "You always do help me," he said. "How?" I asked, very surprised by your cheerfulness. That was certainly the loveliest thing he said. It was wonderful. He must have grown to love me as a friend, and that is enough for the time being. I am so grateful and happy. I just can't find the words. I must apologize, Kitty, that my style is not up to standard today. I have just written down what came into my head. I have the feeling now that Peter and I share a secret. If he looks at me with those eves that laugh and wink, then it's just as if a little light goes on inside me. I hope it will remain like this, and that we may have many, many more glorious times together. Your grateful, happy, and Monday, March 20th, 1944. Dear Kitty, this morning Peter asked me if I would come again one evening and said that I really didn't disturb him, and if there's room for one, there's room for two. I said that I couldn't come every evening because they wouldn't like it downstairs, but he thought that I needn't let that bother me. Then I said that I would love to come one Saturday evening and especially asked him to warn me when there was a moon. Then we'll go downstairs, he answered, and look at the moon from there. In the meantime, a little shadow has fallen on my happiness. I've thought for a long time that Margot liked Peter quite a lot too. How much she loves him I don't know, but I think it's wretched. I must curse her terrible pain each time I'm with Peter, and the funny part of it is that she hardly shows it. I know quite well that I'd be desperately jealous, but Margot only says that I needn't pity her. I think it's so rotten that you should be the odd one out, I added. I'm used to that, she answered, somewhat bitterly. I don't dare tell Peter this yet, perhaps later on, but we've got to talk about so many other things first. I had a little ticking off yesterday evening from Mummy, which I certainly deserved. I mustn't overdo my indifference towards her. So, in spite of everything, I must try once again to be friendly and keep my observations to myself. Even Pim is different lately. He is trying not to treat me as such a child, and it makes him much too cool. See what comes of it. Enough for now. I'm full to the brim with Peter and can do nothing but look at him. Evidence of Margot's goodness. I received this today. March 20th, 1944. And when I said yesterday that I was not jealous of you, I was only 50% honest. It is like this. I'm jealous of neither you nor Peter. I only feel a bit sorry that I haven't found anyone yet, and am not likely to for the time being, with whom I can discuss my thoughts and feelings. But I should not grudge it to you for that reason. One misses enough here anyway, things that other people just take for granted. On the other hand, I know for certain that I would never have got so far with Peter, anyway, because I have the feeling that if I wished to discuss a lot with anyone, I should want to be on rather intimate terms with him. I would want to have the feeling that he understood me through and through without my having to say much. But for that reason, it would have to be someone whom I felt was my superior intellectually, and that is not the case with Peter. But I can imagine it being so with you and Peter. You are not doing me out of anything which is my due. Do not reproach yourself in the least on my account. You and Peter can only gain by the friendship. My reply. Dear Margot, I thought your letter was exceptionally sweet, but I still don't feel quite happy about it, and nor do I think that I shall. At present there is no question of such confidence as you have in mind between Peter and myself, but in the twilight beside an open window you can say more to each other than in brilliant sunshine. Also, it's easier to whisper your feelings than to trumpet them forth out loud. I believe that you are beginning to feel a kind of sisterly affection for Peter, and that you would love to help him, just as much as I. Perhaps you will still be able to do that sometime, although that is not the kind of confidence we have in mind. I think it must come from both sides, and I believe that's the reason why Daddy and I have never got so far. Let's not talk about it anymore, but if still want anything, please write to me about it, because I can say what I mean much better on paper. You don't know how much I admire you, and I only hope that I may yet acquire some of the goodness that you and Daddy have, because now I don't see much difference between you and Daddy in that sense. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, March 22nd, 1944. Dear Kitty, I received this from Margot this evening. Dear Anne, after your letter yesterday, I have the unpleasant feeling that you will have pickings of conscience when you visit Peter, but really there is no reason for this. In my heart of hearts, I feel that I have the right to share mutual confidence with someone, but I could not bear Peter in that role yet. However, I do feel just as you say, that Peter is a bit like a brother, but a younger brother. We have put out feelers towards each other. The affection of a brother and sister might grow if they touched. Perhaps they will later, perhaps never, however. It has certainly not reached that stage yet. Therefore, you really needn't pity me. now that you've found companionship. Enjoy it as much as you can. In the meantime, it is getting more and more wonderful here. I believe, Kitty, that we may have a real great love in the secret Annex. Don't worry, I'm not thinking of marrying him. I don't know what he will be like when he grows up, nor do I know whether we should ever love each other enough to marry. I know now that Peter loves me, but just how I myself don't know yet. Whether he only wants a great friend, or whether I attract him as a girl or as a sister, I can't yet discover. When he said that I always helped him over his parents' quarrels, I was awfully glad. It was one step towards making me believe in his friendship. I asked him yesterday what he would do if there were a dozen Annas here who always kept coming to him. His reply was, if they were all like you, it certainly wouldn't be too bad. He's tremendously hospitable towards me, and I really believe he likes to see me. Meanwhile, he is working diligently at his French, even when he's in bed, going on until 10:15. Oh, when I think about Saturday evening and recall it all, word for word, then for the first time I don't feel discontented about myself. I mean that I would still say exactly the same and wouldn't wish to change anything, as is usually the case. He is so handsome, both when he laughs and when he looks quietly in front of him. He is such a darling and so good. I believe what surprised him most about me was when he discovered that I'm not a bit the superficial worldly and that I appear, but just as dreamy a specimen, with just as many difficulties as he himself. Yours, Anne. Reply. Dear Margot, I think the best thing we can do is simply to wait and see what happens. It can't be very long before Peter and I come to a definite decision, either to go on as before or be different. Just which way it will go I don't know myself, and I don't bother to look beyond my own nose. But I shall certainly do one thing. If Peter and one decide to be friends, I shall tell him that you are very fond of him too, and would always be prepared to help him should the need arise. The latter may not be what you wish, but I don't care now. I don't know what Peter thinks about you, but I shall ask him then. I'm sure it's not bad the opposite. You are always welcome to join us in the attic or wherever we are. You honestly won't disturb us because I feel we have a silent agreement to talk only in the evenings when it's dark. Keep your courage up, like I do. Although it's not always easy, your time may come sooner than you think. Yours, Anne. Thursday, March 23rd, 1944. Dear Kitty, things are running more or less normally again now. Our coupon men are out of prison again, thank goodness. Meep returned yesterday. Ellie is better, although she still has a cough. Kufuis will have to stay at home for a long time still. A plane crashed near here yesterday. The occupants were able to jump out in time by parachute. The machine crashed onto a school, but there were no children there at the time. The result was a small fire and 2 people killed. The Germans shot at the airmen terribly as they were coming down. The Amsterdammers who saw it nearly exploded with rage and indignation at the cowardliness of such a deed. We am speaking of the ladies nearly jumped out of our skins. I loathe the blasted shooting. I often go upstairs after supper nowadays and take a breath of the fresh evening air. I like it up there, sitting on a chair beside him and looking outside. Van Dawn and Dussel make very feeble remarks when I disappear into his room. And second home, they call it, or is it suitable for young gentlemen to receive young girls in semi-darkness? Peter shows amazing wit in his replies to these so-called humorous sallies. For that matter, Mummy too is somewhat curious and would love to ask what we talk about if she wasn't secretly afraid of being snubbed. Peter says it's nothing but envy on the part of the grown-ups because we are young and we don't pay much attention to their spitefulness. Sometimes he comes and gets me from downstairs, but he turns simply scarlet in spite of all precautions and can hardly get the words out of his mouth. How thankful I am that I don't blush. It must be a highly unpleasant sensation. Daddy always says I'm prudish and vain, but that's not true. I'm just simply vain. I have not often had anyone tell me I was pretty, except a boy at school who said I looked so attractive when I laughed. Yesterday I received a genuine compliment from Peter, and just for fun I will tell you roughly how the conversation went. Peter so often used to say, "Do laugh," and this struck me as odd, and I asked, "Why must I always laugh?" "Because I like it. You get such dimples in your cheeks when you laugh. How do they come, actually?" "I was born with them." I've got one in my chin too. That's my only beauty. Of course not. That's not true. Yes, it is. I know quite well that I'm not a beauty. I never have been and never shall be. I don't agree at all. I think you're pretty. That's not true. If I say so, then you can take it from me it is. Then I naturally said the same of him. I hear a lot from all sides about the sudden friendship. We don't take much notice of all this parental chatter. Their remarks are so feeble. Have the two sets of parents forgotten their own youth? It seems like it. At least they seem to take us seriously, if we make a joke and laugh at us when we are serious. Yours, Anne. Monday, March 27th, 1944. Dear Kitty, one very big chapter of our history in hiding should really be about politics, but as this subject doesn't interest me personally very much, I've rather let it go. So, for once I will devote my whole letter to politics today. It goes without saying that there are very many different opinions on this topic, and it's even more logical that it should be a favorite subject for discussion in such critical times, but it's just simply stupid that there should be so many quarrels over it. They may speculate, laugh, abuse, and grumble. Let them do what they will, as long as they stew in their own juice and don't quarrel, because the consequences are usually unpleasant. The people from outside bring with them a lot of news that is not true. However, up till now our radio hasn't lied to us. Hank, Meep, Confucius, Ellie, and Crowler all show ups and downs in their political moods, Hank least of all. Political feeling here in the secret Annex is always about the same. During the countless arguments over invasion, air raids, speeches, etc., one also always hears the countless cries of impossible or earn got willin'. If they're going to start now, however long is it going to last? It's going splendidly, first class, good. Optimists, pessimists, and, above all, don't let's forget the realists who give their opinions with untiring energy and, just as with everything else, each one thinking he is right. It annoys a certain lady that her spouse has such unparalleled faith in the British, and a certain gentleman attacks his lady because of her teasing and disparaging remarks about his beloved nation. They never seem to tire of it. I have discovered something. The effects are stupendous, just like pricking someone with a pin and waiting to see how they jump. This is what I do. Begin on politics. One question, one word, one sentence, and at once they're off. Just as if the German Wehrmacht news bulletins and the English BBC were not enough, they have now introduced special air raid announcements. In one word, magnificent, but on the other hand, often disappointing too. The British are making a non-stop business of their air attacks, with the same zest as the Germans make a business of lying. The radio therefore goes on early in the morning and is listened to at all hours of the day until 9, 10, and often 11 o'clock in the evening. This is certainly a sign that the grown-ups have infinite patience, but it also means the power of absorption of their brains is pretty limited, with exceptions. Of course, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. 1 or 2 news bulletins would be ample per day. But the old geese, well, I've said my piece. Arbiter program, radio, Orange, Frank Phillips, or Her Majesty Queen Wilhelmina, they each get their turn and an ever-attentive ear. And if they're not eating or sleeping, then they're sitting around the radio and discussing food, sleep, and politics. Ugh. It gets so boring, and it's quite a job not to become a dull old stick oneself. Politics can't do much more harm to the parents. I must mention one shining exception. A speech by our beloved Winston Churchill is quite perfect. 9 o'clock on Sunday evening. The teapot stands, with the cozy over it, on the table, and the guests come in. Dussel next to the radio on the left, Mr. Van Dawn in front of it with Peter beside him. Mummy next to Mr. Van Dawn and Mrs. Van Dawn behind him, and Pim at the table, Margot and I beside. I see I haven't described very clearly how we sit. The gentlemen puff away at their pipes. Peter's eyes are popping out of his head with the strain of listening, Mummy wearing a long dark negligee, and Mrs. Van Dawn trembling because of the planes, which take no notice of the speech but fly blithely on towards Essen. Daddy sipping tea, Margot and I united in a sisterly fashion by sleeping Mushji, who is monopolizing both our knees. Margot's hair is in curlers. I am wearing a nightdress, which is much too small, too narrow, and too short. It all looks so intimate, snug, peaceful, and this time it is too, yet I await the consequences with horror. They can hardly wait till the end of the speech, stamping their feet, so impatient are they to get down to discussing it. Beer are they egg each other on until the arguments lead to discord and quarrels. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, March 28th, 1944. Dearest Kitty, I could write a lot more about politics, but I have heaps of other things to tell you today. First, Mommy has more or less forbidden me to go upstairs so often because, according to her, Mrs. Van Dawn is jealous. Secondly, Peter has invited Margot to join us upstairs. I don't know whether it's just out of politeness or whether he really means it. Thirdly, I went and asked Daddy if he thought I need pay any regard to Mrs. Van Dawn's jealousy, and he didn't think so. What next? Mummy and cross, perhaps jealous too. Daddy doesn't grudge us these times and thinks it's nice that we get on so well. Margot is fond of Peter too, but feels that two's company and three's a crowd. Mummy thinks that Peter is in love with me. Quite frankly, I only wish he were, then we'd be quite and really be able to get to know each other. She also says that he keeps on looking at me. Now, I suppose that's true, but still, I can't help it if he looks at my dimples and we wink at each other occasionally, can I? I'm in a very difficult position. Mummy is against me and I'm against her. Daddy closes his eyes and tries not to see the silent battle between us. Mummy is sad because she does really love me, while I'm not in the least bit sad because I don't think she understands. And Peter, I don't want to give Peter up, he's such a darling. I admire him so. It can grow into something beautiful between us. Why do the old UNS have to poke their noses in all the time? Luckily, I'm quite used to hiding my feelings and I manage extremely well not to let them see how mad I am about him. Will he ever say anything? Will I ever feel his cheek against mine, like I felt Pete's cheek in my dream? Oh, Peter and Patel, you're one and the same. They don't understand us. Won't they ever grasp that we are happy, just sitting together and not saying a word? They don't understand what has driven us together like this. Oh, when will all these difficulties be overcome? And yet it is good to overcome them, because then the end will be all the more wonderful. When he lies with his head on his arm with his eyes closed, then he is still a child. When he plays with Bosch, he is loving. When he carries potatoes or anything heavy, then he is strong. When he goes and watches the shooting, or looks for burglars in the darkness, then he is brave. And when he is so awkward and clumsy, then he is just a pet. I like it much better if he explains something to me than when I have to teach him. I would really adore him to be my superior in almost everything. What do we care about the two mothers? Oh, but if only he would speak. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, March 29th, 1944. Dear Kitty, Boekstein, an MP, was speaking on the Dutch news from London, and he said that they ought to make a collection of diaries and letters after the war. Of course, they all made a rush of my diary immediately. Just imagine how interesting it would be if I were to publish a romance of the secret Annex. The title alone would be enough to make people think it was a detective story. The original title of this diary was Het Achterhuis. There is no exact into English, the nearest being the secret Annex. But, seriously, it would seem quite funny 10 years after the war if we Jews were to tell how we lived and what we ate and talked about here. Although I tell you a lot still, even so, you only know very little of our lives. How scared the ladies are during the air raids. For instance, on Sunday, when 350 British planes dropped 500,000 kilos of bombs on Imoyden, how the houses trembled like a wisp of grass in the wind, and who knows how many epidemics now rage. You don't know anything about all these things, and I would need to keep on writing me whole day if I were to tell you everything in detail. People have to line up for vegetables and all kinds of other things. Doctors are unable to visit the sick, because if they turn their backs on their cars for a moment, they are stolen. Burglaries and thefts abound. So much so that you wonder what has taken hold of the Dutch for them suddenly to have become such thieves. Little children of 8 and 11 years break the windows of people's homes and steal whatever they can lay their hands on. No one dares to leave his house unoccupied for 5 minutes, because if you go, your things go too. Every day there are announcements in the newspapers offering rewards for the return of lost property, typewriters, Persian rugs, electric clocks, cloth, etc., etc. Electric clocks in the streets are dismantled. Public telephones are pulled to pieces down to the last thread. Morale among the population can't be good. The weekly rations are not enough to last for 2 days except the coffee substitute. The invasion is a long time coming, and the men have to go to Germany. The children are ill or undernourished. Everyone is wearing old clothes and old shoes. A new sole costs 7.50 florins in the black market. Moreover, hardly any of the shoemakers will accept shoe repairs or, if they do, you have to wait months, during which time the shoes often disappear. There's one good thing in the midst of it all, which is that as the food gets worse and the measures against the people more severe, so sabotage against the authorities steadily increases. The people in the food offices, the police, officials, they all either work with their fellow citizens and help them, or they tell tales on them and have them sent to prison. Fortunately, only a small percentage of Dutch people are on the wrong side. Yours, Anne. Friday, March 31st, 1944. Dear Kitty, think of it, it's still pretty cold, but most people have been without coal for about a month. Pleasant. In general, public feeling over the Russian front is optimistic again, because that is terrific. You know I don't write much about politics, but I must just tell you where they are now. They are right by the Polish border and have reached the Pruth near Romania. They are close to Odessa. Every evening here they expect an extra communique from Stalin. They fire off so many salvos in Moscow to celebrate their victories that the city must rumble and shake just about every day. Whether they think it's fun to pretend that the war is close at hand again, or that they know of no other way of expressing their joy, I don't know. Hungary is occupied by German troops. There are still 1 million Jews there, so they too will have had it now. The chatter about Peter and me has calmed down a bit now. We are very good friends, are together a lot, and discuss every imaginable subject. It is awfully nice never to have to keep a check on myself as I would have to with other boys, whenever we get onto precarious ground. We were talking, for instance, about blood, and via that subject we began talking about menstruation. He thinks we women are pretty tough. Why on earth? My life here has improved greatly, and God has not left me alone and will not leave me alone. Yours, Anne.